Guilty, 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 guilty. Thursday evening, the jury came back with guilty verdicts on all 34 felony counts against Trump. We'll talk about what that means and potential sentencing outcomes, but let's just do a recap of the trial. For those of you who weren't really paying attention until the case was fully decided, this is your rundown of what you missed. If you've been watching these recap videos every week, thanks. And this is also a general recap that you don't want to miss because, yeah, a lot happened, okay? The trial lasted 7 weeks total. The prosecution out of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office called 20 witnesses over 15 days. The defense called 2 witnesses. Trump did not testify, very unfortunately for our entertainment. The case is about falsified business records relating to hush money payments paid to porn star Stormy Daniels by Trump's fixer Michael Cohen to buy her silence ahead of the election to avoid the fallout that would come from voters finding out about both that Access Hollywood grab 'em by the pussy tape, remember the one, and the Stormy Daniels affair, both within a month of the election. Here's a reminder of that timeline. Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for the hush money payments in monthly $35,000 checks that were labeled legal fees and added to the books as legal fees instead of being correctly labeled as reimbursement. And this mislabeling, according to a jury of 12 of Trump's peers, was felonious in an attempt to cover up election interference in paying for Daniels' silence, blocking the information from the American people so they could not take it into consideration in casting their votes. Would it have made a difference ultimately in 2016? Who knows? But Trump, through his cronies, felt that it made enough of a difference to make it worth paying $130,000 for her silence and then attempting to cover it up so no one would ever find out. The 34 counts against Trump were related to the physical checks sent to Cohen, the mislabeled entries in the business's books, and the mislabeled invoices. And that's where they were getting the 34 separate counts. Over the course of the 7 weeks of testimony and arguments, the prosecution successfully proved, at least to this jury, that Trump orchestrated this scheme beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's basic argument was the following. In 2015, Trump met with National Enquirer CEO David Pecker along with Cohen to hash out a catch-and-kill scheme in which the National Enquirer agreed to suppress negative stories about Trump, promote negative stories about his opponents, and publish only positive stories about Trump. They would even send stories to Cohen and Trump ahead of time before publishing, which should give us all pause about how readily a presidential candidate was able to collude with the press, albeit not the most prestigious of press, to manipulate coverage of the election. That is unsettling, okay? And during the course of that agreement, the National Enquirer paid off a doorman with a phony story about an illegitimate child fathered by Trump. And they paid off a woman named Karen McDougal, who also had a story about an affair with Trump. And in exchange for her silence, the National Enquirer paid her $150,000 and promised to publish her work in their publications. Then in early October 2016, the Access Hollywood tape dropped, and the Trump campaign was in chaos. Stormy Daniels had been shopping her story about her affair with Trump, which happened back in 2006. And after that Access Hollywood tape dropped, demand was very high for her story, whereas before there was no demand. The National Enquirer had not been reimbursed for the hush money that they'd already paid out, so they wouldn't pay out more to Daniels and told Daniels to talk to Cohen, Trump's fixer, directly if she wanted some money for her silence. Through Keith Davidson, Daniels' lawyer, Cohen worked out a deal to pay her $130,000 for her silence. He tried to drag his feet until after the election at Trump's direction in hopes that Trump would be elected and then her story wouldn't matter anymore. But on October 26, less than 2 weeks before the election, the deal went through. And at Trump's behest and with his full knowledge and support, Cohen wired Daniels' lawyer $130,000 through a phony LLC after taking out a second mortgage on his house to finance it. And Cohen was then paid back over the course of 12 payments labeled as legal expenses to cover up Trump's involvement in the scheme that was ultimately meant to influence the outcome of the 2016 election by hiding pertinent information from the American public. In the years since this scheme unfolded, Stormy Daniels has sued to get out from under that NDA and published her own book detailing the affair. Cohen was convicted in relation to the payoff and other unrelated crimes, including perjury, and has since flipped on Trump and made millions off his own book deal, Trump-related consulting, and his podcast and anti-Trump t-shirt sales. And a lot of you have asked me to get on board and make Trump t-shirts of my own, to which I say, stay tuned. So this whole story was told by the prosecution in its opening and closing arguments and over the course of those 15 days of testimony by 20 witnesses, the most notable of whom included Trump's close aide, Hope Hicks, who, despite still being a Trump loyalist, confirmed on the stand that the Trump campaign was thrown into chaos by the Access Hollywood tape and was in crisis mode, trying to put out any fires it could to mitigate any further damage by negative stories coming out about Trump. She also confirmed Cohen was not a pleasant guy and would not have acted out of the kindness of his his heart or without the go-ahead from Trump. We also heard from David Pecker, then CEO of the National Enquirer's parent company, who testified as to the agreement of the catch and kill scheme and the communications with Trump's team over the payoffs related to Trump stories. Stormy Daniels' lawyer testified, confirming the timeline of her payoff and the details of the agreement, before Stormy herself took the stand and confirmed the affair, the lurid details of the sexual encounter they had, the deal she struck with Cohen, and the subsequent fallout from the incident in her life. We also heard from Jeff Connolly, the controller at the Trump Organization, who confirmed the payments that were made to Cohen, confirmed that Trump was incredibly hands-on, frugal, and meticulous with where every penny went at the Trump org. Nothing happened without his go-ahead and knowledge. Finally, we heard from the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, who, despite being an incredibly unpleasant man, according to everyone's testimony, and despite being a convicted perjurer, gave apparently convincing testimony during which he remained calm and level-headed despite the defense's attempt to undermine his credibility at every turn. The prosecution had a tough job overcoming Cohen's years of baggage and literal criminal convictions, but they did so by corroborating Cohen's testimony not only with as much documentary evidence as possible, but also with the testimony of every other witness they called, who all painted the same cohesive picture of what happened. The defense, for its part, maintained that Trump was innocent. Their argument: this wasn't illegal at all, if it even happened. This was an innocent NDA. People sign those all the time. And Cohen did do legal services for the Trumps while he was receiving the payments, so this is just repayment for legitimate legal services. And in any event, Trump didn't even know about these payments. Cohen went behind Trump's back and did this all by himself, and is also a liar who is simply obsessed with hating Trump and has made a fortune off of Trump. They didn't offer an alternate story. They just said that Trump didn't do it and Cohen's a liar. And sometimes that's enough. It wasn't in this case. Closing arguments happened Tuesday this week. There was no court Monday because of the Memorial Day holiday. The defense went first, and they used closing arguments to argue that Trump was a busy man and could not have possibly known everything that was going on. But they really spent the majority of the closing arguments attacking Cohen once more, saying not only that he was a liar, but also saying, hey, have you heard that saying, GOAT, greatest of all time? Yeah, well, Cohen, he's a gloat, greatest liar of all time. Take that. And that's about it. The prosecution used the opportunity to connect the dots for the jury, reiterate the testimony and evidence that the jury had seen, and lay out the pieces so they could clearly see that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. In one very theatrical moment, the prosecution addressed what had become a major defense sticking point: a 1-minute, 30-second phone call Cohen claims he made to Trump's bodyguard right before wiring the Stormy Daniels payment. In that call, Cohen claims he spoke with the bodyguard briefly about harassing phone calls he had been receiving and what to do about them, and then the bodyguard passed the phone to Trump, and Cohen confirmed the Stormy Daniels payment with him. The defense said in one 90-second phone call, there's no way he could have covered all of those topics, so he must be lying. So the prosecution, again very theatrically during closing arguments, reenacted what was potentially said on that phone call. The prosecutor set the timer on his phone and went through the call, discussing the harassing phone calls, then asking to be passed to Trump and confirming the payment. He didn't go quickly, he took his time, he added pauses, he followed the pacing of what could be a normal conversation, and then he hung up and stopped the timer. It had taken him 45 seconds. The idea being that they could have very well covered all that information in a 1.5-minute phone call. Just because it was short doesn't mean Cohen was lying. And I liked that imagery. You love a theatrical court moment because they usually are few and far between. Closing arguments took the full day on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the judge gave the jury their instructions, which were 55 pages about the law and how to apply it to the facts of the case. Jury instructions took about an hour. They included the following information. Prosecutors are required to prove 2 elements for each of the counts in order to find Trump guilty. They must find that he personally, or by acting in concert with another person or persons, made or caused a false entry in the records of a business. Prosecutors must also prove that Trump did so with the intent to commit or conceal another crime. Prosecutors allege the other crime that Trump intended to commit or conceal was a violation of a state election law regarding a conspiracy to promote or prevent an election by unlawful means. The alleged unlawful means that jurors must consider are violations of federal campaign finance law, falsifying other business records, such as paperwork used to establish the bank account used to pay Stormy Daniels, violation of city, state, and federal tax laws, including by providing false or fraudulent information on tax returns, even if it does not result in underpayment of taxes. Misinformation about the instructions began soon after the judge was done reading them. Specifically, people were up in arms thinking that the judge had told the jurors that they did not have to reach a unanimous decision. That is not true. The judge told the jury that to convict Trump on any given charge, they will have to find unanimously, that is, all 12 jurors must agree that the former president created a fraudulent entry in his company's records or caused someone else to do so, and that he did so with the intent of committing or concealing a crime. Where the confusion came in is that Judge Marchiony gave the jurors 3 possible unlawful means that they can apply to Trump's charges: falsifying other business records, breaking the Federal Election Campaign Act, or submitting false information on a tax return. For a conviction, each juror would have to find that at least one of those 3 things happened, but they don't have to agree unanimously on which it was, because he wasn't being convicted of the underlying crime, just of falsifying business records with the intent to cover up an underlying crime. So as long as each juror believed beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump was attempting to cover up any one of those 3 crimes, then he's guilty of the charge. The jury hears the instructions but is not given a copy of them, which New York law prohibits. After they were given their instructions, the jury was sent to deliberate, and this was the first time they were allowed to talk to each other about the case. They just had to sit around making small talk for 6 full weeks while sitting on this jury together, which is my idea of a nightmare. Only once they were sent to deliberate were they allowed to actually talk about the case. They sent a note on their first day of deliberations on Wednesday to ask the judge to repeat some jury instructions for them and ask to rehear some testimony. They're not only not given a copy of the instructions, they also aren't given a copy of witness testimony and have to instead send a note every time they want the transcript read to them or the instructions repeated. And I couldn't find specifically why in New York law the jury isn't allowed these things. I could see it stemming from a desire for the jury to take the testimony as they received it and make a decision based on that experience. Reading a transcript of testimony versus being in the room during testimony is very different. You don't pick up on the tone, you don't get the witness's demeanor, all of which is important for the jury to determine the credibility of each witness. So obsessing over the transcript and reading into it, something that they didn't get from the verbal testimony, could maybe incorrectly sway them. That's my guess. Specifically on Wednesday, they wanted to hear testimony from David Pecker related to that 2015 meeting between him, Trump, and Cohen over the catch and kill scheme with the National Enquirer, along with some of his other testimony. And the lawyers have to then painstakingly go over the transcripts to extract the portions the jury has asked for, because it's not all contained in one easy, simple answer. And in all, the snippets the jury wanted reread to them totaled 35 pages of testimony. So over the course of 2 days and 10 hours, they deliberated, and on Thursday evening, as news reporters were packing up for the day, the judge announced a verdict had been reached. The jury filed into the courtroom, where no cameras were allowed, and news reporters waited at the ready to announce the verdicts virtually. The jury foreman stood and said 34 times that Trump is guilty. Trump is reported to have sat unmoving but rather glum as the counts were read aloud, and the news coverage of the verdicts has been mixed. News sources on the left proclaimed his guilt and the historical nature of this conviction, emphasizing his intent to influence the 2016 elections and the political implications of this verdict. On the right, the news emphasized Trump's ongoing assertions of political persecution and claims that the trial was rigged and the trial was election interference in itself. And thanks to my partner on today's video, Ground News, it's easy to see how this verdict was reported across the news and across the political spectrum. Ground News compiled over 600 articles on this story. You can follow along at ground.news/Leeja, or scan the QR code to read more. In Ground News, you can see all the coverage in one place, and they even provide a biased comparison of the sources. I thought it was really interesting that only 22% of the coverage was right-leaning, indicating that those news sources may be downplaying the verdict. Out of all of those sources, you can see there's a split mix of factuality. Ground News offers insights into the factual accuracy of these sources and reveals information about their funding, which empowers you to draw your own conclusions. And if you scroll down, you can compare headlines to see how narratives change depending on their bias, factuality, and ownership. So you can see left-leaning publications like the Rolling Stone and Vanity Fair featured headlines like "Donald Trump is now a convicted felon" and "This Florida man is now a convicted felon," while right-leaning Washington Examiner used the headline "A Donald Trump show trial that no one wanted." Having these comparisons helps to be more informed about the reaction to this verdict, which can help you gauge how voters are feeling as Election Day approaches, especially now that one of the candidates will be a convicted felon. And don't miss the Ground News 2024 election page, where you can stay up to date on all the latest election news and see blind spot stories to know both sides of the story. Blind spot is a great Ground News feature that allows you to see stories that are under or over-reported on each side of the political spectrum. To check it out, click the link in the description or go to ground.news/Leeja or scan the QR code and sign up through my link this month to get 40% off unlimited access and help an independent team keep the media transparent. Thanks, Ground News. So Trump is a convicted felon. What happens next? His sentencing hearing is scheduled for July 11th, just a few days before the Republican National Convention is set to officially nominate him. The judge has pretty wide discretion on the sentencing. It can include up to 4 years in prison per count. However, there are a number of things at play that indicate he will not serve jail time. One is that he doesn't have any prior felony convictions, and this is a non-violent financial crime. Typically, for these types of crimes and defendants with no priors, judges aren't going to throw the book at them, so to speak. And second, this is a trial involving a former and potentially future president of the United States. While no one is above the law, the jury were his peers, whether he likes to admit it or not, and justice has to be dealt equally no matter who the defendant is. The judge can and should and probably will take his status and who he is into account. And that's actually really common at sentencing. Judges will often get a pre-sentencing report where the defendant is interviewed and receives various evaluations, and the judge can then learn more about the defendant's background. Did they come from an abusive home? Were they experiencing poverty or homelessness? Have they suffered addiction or mental health issues? Have they generally been upstanding citizens, or do they have a long record of deviance, etc.? And the judge can use that information in coming to a sentencing decision. So it's well within Judge Marchion's discretion to take the fact of who Donald Trump is in making his determination. And I do not envy him his job right now. There are consequences, literal and also symbolic for democracy, of locking up a former president. And this judge has gone to great lengths to be as balanced and measured and impartial as humanly possible. He's given the defense deference and leeway, and he's made tough calls that favored the defense sometimes and the prosecution other times. He's done a great job, frankly, of maintaining the integrity of the judicial system, which is more than I can say about some judges who sit on the highest court of this land. And so in his sentencing, he's likely to tread very cautiously so as not to appear impartial or overly carceral. So it's very doubtful that Trump will see the inside of a jail cell, at least related to these charges. I do, however, love the fact that if he did go to jail, the Secret Service would likely have to go with him because former presidents are guaranteed Secret Service coverage. But yeah, he's probably not going to go to jail. Other options the judge has include home confinement and probation. There's also the possibility that punishment may be doled out only after he exhausts his appeals options, which he has vowed to do. He'll be able to challenge the conviction on numerous grounds, including judicial bias, some of the judge's decisions regarding evidence and witness testimony, and jury pool tainting, especially regarding testimony Stormy Daniels gave that the defense claimed was so prejudicial that the jury was unfairly biased against Trump by hearing that testimony at all. So in true Trump fashion, he will appeal everything humanly possible to try to overturn this conviction, which he claimed is so rigged even Mother Teresa herself couldn't overcome the charges. Here are some more fast facts to answer some common questions. Yes, Trump can still run for president. The Constitution is very brief on its requirements for someone to be president, and whether or not they're a convicted felon apparently didn't cross the minds of our founding fathers because they didn't say convicted felons can't be president. Yes, he can still vote for himself. He is a resident of Florida, so Florida's felon rules apply, but Florida defers to the felon rules of the state where the felony conviction occurred. And in New York, convicted felons can vote so long as they are not actively in prison serving time. So unless he goes to prison, he can still vote this November. No, he cannot pardon himself, at least not in this case. Presidents can only issue pardons for federal crimes. This is a state crime. So if he wins, he can't expunge his record on this case or anything. But the federal crimes he has been accused of could allow him to pardon himself. Yes, he can still get briefings if he becomes president. A felony conviction usually bars people from security clearances, but the president doesn't technically need security clearance. If he's elected, he gets to be briefed. It's possible he'll be barred from owning firearms, but otherwise, the long-term consequences of his conviction are pretty slim compared to the average convicted felon in the US, who usually faces a harder time getting a job, renting an apartment, obtaining a loan, and many other things that require background checks. Trump probably won't have an issue with any of that. How will this affect the election in November? Honestly, it's unclear. There were many independent voters and undecided voters who claimed that a guilty verdict would make them think twice about voting for him. But there are also likely many voters who feel more passionate about voting because they believe this is the system out to get them through Trump. So maybe they wouldn't have voted, but now they're riled up and more interested in engaging. And those are also the type of people who probably don't respond to Marist polls and New York Times questionnaires, so they're harder to nail down. It could be a wash, or it could be that it rallies enough Republicans that it will unify what has been seen as a broken party around their collective frustration at his conviction. I saw reports that Trump's campaign website crashed after the verdict, ostensibly because so many people were on there trying to donate. His campaign sent out an email minutes after the verdict asking for money. And this type of shit only emboldens his most ardent supporters. But Republican lawmakers are coming together to condemn the conviction, and it could be the rallying point they needed to win in November. On the Trump simp forums, the more extreme supporters were commenting things like, our forefathers would be stacking bodies by now and ready for the call to arms, though other extremists like notorious anti-Semite Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones are calling for people to not engage in violence. Jones asserted that the next card in the playbook of the deep state and the globalists would be to mount false flag terror attacks that could be blamed on Trump supporters angry about the verdict. And they all seem very upset about law and order in this one very specific instance. Weird. And then I guess good news for Democrats. RFK Jr. came out pretty strongly in Trump's favor, saying that the courts were being weaponized against him. And I say it's probably good news for Democrats because maybe RFK is doing the right things to pull enough would-be Trump voters away while alienating would-be Biden voters so that if he does offset the election, it'll be by dividing the vote for Trump. But who knows? The reality is there's no way of really predicting what will happen in November. My hope is that the choice being between Biden, who is an old man and who is supporting Israel's war crimes, but who also passed the most progressive climate change bill in a generation and is slowly trying to make good on his promise to cancel as much student loan debt as possible, or Trump, who is now a literal convicted felon, will convince enough left-leaning voters to actually show up and vote. I know a lot of you are disillusioned and sick of voting between the lesser of two evils, but them's the breaks, kids. Not voting is not the way to change the system. Voting third party is not the way to change the system. And you should not be struggling to decide between a man who's old and doesn't align perfectly with your values and another man who's old and a convicted criminal. So we'll see what's in store for Trump on July 11th, and the ultimate test will be November 5th. Please vote. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.